Okay, it worked.
Okay, I hope it's not going to do that again. And so I work at the Lab of Applied Psychology and Ergonomics of the Institute of Psychology of Paris. And in the study I will present you, we assess the effects and usability of a prototypal navigational assistant to assist wayfinding. We do so by administering tasks in the video game Grand Theft Auto 5, and I will show the obtained results regarding the prototype we were testing, and I will highlight the methodological specificities of this work, which could represent an interesting starting point for studies in cognitive science, exploring the cognitive and behavioral processes that occur in realistic virtual environments. So I hope that at the end of this talk you will be as convinced as I am that you can carry out a serious and scientific experiment from a video game where you usually rob banks and steal cars, among other pleasurable activities that I will not mention here so as not to shock anyone. So this presentation, as well as all the results I will be talking about, are based on the article Exploring Human Behavior with Grand Theft Auto 5, a study of assisted cognition in wayfinding, which you can find on the website of the International Journal of Virtual Reality in Open Access. Grand Theft Auto is a commercial software, and all the uses that are presented in this talk and in the article have been licensed by Take-Two Interactive Software Incorporation. In this first part of the talk, I will present you our theoretical framework and our objectives, which deal with spatial navigation, wayfinding, but also methodological objectives, which deal with virtual reality and video games. But first, I'd like to introduce our theoretical framework by asking a question. What is spatial navigation? Spatial navigation is actually something we all do every day. Whether you try to reach a destination outdoors, to meet people or go to places, or indoors, when you move within a building, you navigate in space. It is the first step of most daily activities. It is sustained by two key components, locomotion and wayfinding, which will be our focus of attention for this talk. Wayfinding is the cognitive counterpart of locomotion. It is the construct and the use of internal spatial representations in order to find and follow a path linking two places. It is a complex cognitive task. Therefore, many navigational aids exist and aim at reducing its cognitive cost for the user in order to help them find their way in the environment. However, most aids use bird's-eye view information of the environment, which is hard to process for human cognition. But easier and more basic forms of spatial representations exist. For example, you might not know where north and south are, but you know that there is a red brick house at the corner of the street or a library just in front of you. These points of interest in the environment that you can easily spot and remember are called the landmarks. This spatial information could be used by a navigational aid in order to ease wayfinding. Therefore, our first question is, could navigational aids using more human-friendly spatial information, especially landmarks, ease wayfinding and provide a better experience for the user? Many studies in the field of spatial cognition have related the different cognitive processes that occur in wayfinding. Many of the studies use virtual reality. This tool helps to overcome the limitations of the real world. It allows the standardization of experimental conditions for many different participants. It makes the lab more lifelike. However, there is no turnkey solution. It means that most of the studies which have used virtual environments had to develop them from scratch. And lifelike virtual environments are hard to develop. They are time-consuming and sometimes budget-consuming. There are several consequences to this for research. First, homemade virtual environments may not achieve psychological fidelity. Since they may not be visually realistic, one can only conjecture that the behaviors that are triggered during the studies are the exact same ones that would occur in real environments. Second, these environments that are made in the lab often stay in the lab. They are not publicly available, so there is no other lab that could use the same environment and replicate the study. There is therefore a difficulty in generalizability of the results. Our second question therefore is, could widely available video games provide a worthwhile alternative to lab-made virtual environments? Therefore, we had two objectives, one in the field of spatial cognition and ergonomics, and one regarding methodology. First, we wanted to assess the effect on wayfinding and usability of an innovative navigational aid using landmark information. And second, we wanted to gather evidence on the use of a widely available video game, Grand Theft Auto 5, as an easily replicable and adaptable means of investigating cognitive processes. In this part of the talk, I will discuss the material and methods we used for this study. I will start with an overview of our experimental design. There were 46 participants with an average age of 22 years old. There were two experimental conditions depending on the prototypal navigational assistant that was assigned to the participant. There was one bird's-eye view assistant, which we'll call the survey-based assistant, and which is inspired by most common navigational aids you can find, like Google Maps, and one landmark-based assistant, which was the new prototype we wanted to assess. Procedure for the participant was divided into two parts. First, a wayfinding task, which led the participant to follow verbal instructions in two different districts of the virtual city of Los Santos, which is the main city of the map of Grand Theft Auto 5, and a usability evaluation made by the participant of the prototypal navigational assistant. Our measurements were of two kinds. First, an evaluation of the induced performance on the wayfinding task, including the number of mistakes, of visual explorations of the environment, and of stops, and also an evaluation of the mean inter-event time interval between two visual explorations and two stops. Also, there was a usability score that was assigned by the participant to the prototypal navigational assistant. Two prototypes of the navigational assistants we used in the study were operated thanks to a Wizard of Oz protocol, meaning that the participants were under the impression that they were using a fully functional device, but actually it was just a speaker wired to my laptop, which transmitted instructions that I had previously written and recorded with a synthetic voice. So each direction given by both assistants were divided into three parts, first part and the last part being the same for both assistants, but the middle part being different depending on the assistant. First part of the directions always stated a landmark that was visually close to the participant. For example, the assistant said, "You are near the Astro movie theater." Then, the landmark assistant used the previously stated landmark to ask participants to perform an action linked to the landmark according to their own point of view. For example, go along the theater on the right. Whereas the survey assistant did not make use of the landmark that was stated in the initial statement and gave a direction independent of the participant's point of view, like head southwest, which is extremely close to what we can hear when we use Google Maps or other applications like this. In the end, both assistants gave the same closing statement. For example, then stop at the intersection. So I put a video on this slide. I know that the frame rate is not okay with this platform, but it just enables you to see a few pictures of the game. So apart from the prototypal assistant, Grand Theft Auto 5 indeed represented an important part of our study material. The experiment was carried out using the director mode, a feature included in the game that allows the environmental and visual parameters of Grand Theft Auto 5 to be controlled. Grand Theft Auto 5 was configured specifically for the experiment, so as to be identical across conditions and participants. For example, the time was set at 8 in the morning, the time flow was frozen, and the weather was clear and sunny like you can see on this video, so that it enabled the participants to orient themselves thanks to the location of the sun in the east and the direction of shadows. Pedestrians and traffic densities were set to low in order to make the environment vivid with limited risks of collisions between participants and non-player characters, and so on and so on. Importantly, the point of view was set on first person, as Grand Theft Auto 5 is by default a third-person video game, but allows first-person view so that it could mimic human vision as closely as possible. Also, some of you who have played the game might wonder about the minimap, which is by default a part of the gaming interface. The game also provides all useful settings to modify the head-up display. It had therefore hidden entirely the interface, so the screen was free of any information, including the minimap. So, with that in mind, regarding navigational assistance in Grand Theft Auto 5, the wayfinding task was set as follows. The participant was sat in a chair in front of a screen which displayed Grand Theft Auto 5. A loudspeaker transmitted instructions of the navigational assistant, and the participant could move in Grand Theft Auto 5 thanks to a 3D rudder, which is an actual gaming device that is a navigation controller. It allows the participant to move in-game by using their feet with rocking and pressing movements. The participants had to complete 2 routes, one for each district of the virtual city. Both routes are pictured on the right side of the screen. For each route, the participants had to go from their starting point to 2 different shops successively. Since they were guided by the navigational assistant that was assigned to them, the routes were invariable for all participants. During the task, the participant's screen was recorded on video files using Open Broadcaster software, which is an open software. Wayfinding performance was measured by coding the video recordings using the Behavioral Observation Research Interactive Software, nicknamed BORES, which is also an open software and allows accurate analysis of the videos by enabling to measure every event that happens on the screen, as you can see on this screenshot. At the end of the task, the participants had to complete a system usability scale, which is a questionnaire that gives an overall usability score that represents the perceived effectiveness and efficiency of the system, as well as the satisfaction felt by the user during the use. While objectively measured effectiveness and efficiency on a given task, like the evaluation we made on the videos, indeed play a part in the experience a user will have of any system, subjective evaluation of these parameters, as well as satisfaction, measures the actual usability of such system. There is indeed a possibility that a system enables its users to effectively complete a given task, but at the expense of much time and effort that lead to this system being unused. The usability of both navigational assistants was therefore assessed in order to deepen the analysis of the effect on overall user experience. In this last part of the talk, I will present the obtained results and discuss them, as well as the perspectives that are opened with this research. I will focus on the impact of the navigational assistance on performance and usability, and I will discuss the interests of this video game-based methodology. So, at first, let's take a look at the impact of the navigational assistant on wayfinding performance. When we look at these graphs from left to right, we see that with the landmark assistant, which was our new prototype, the participants made fewer mistakes. Also, they made fewer visual explorations, and the time interval between 2 explorations is longer, meaning that they made an exploration less often. Finally, they made fewer stops and less often also. So, with fewer mistakes, it enables us to say that the landmark assistant induces a better effectiveness of wayfinding, as a participant can go from their starting point to their destination without making a lot of mistakes, which contrasts with the survey assistant. Also, the participants make fewer visual explorations and fewer stops, and both behaviors occur less frequently, meaning that the trip is smoother. The participants don't have to look around or stop as often as with the survey assistant. Therefore, we conclude that there is a better efficiency of wayfinding in both cases. These objective measures are interesting, but we also want to see if they translate into the subjective evaluation of usability that is made by the user at the end of the experiment. So let's take a look at the results of the system usability scale. And it is interesting to note that the results observed with the objective measures are found also with the subjective measure of usability of the prototype. The landmark assistant is evaluated as good, which means it is considered as an acceptable system, whereas the survey assistant is just evaluated as OK, which means it is a marginally acceptable system. It is therefore evaluated far behind the prototype we wanted to assess. It means that the users judge the landmark assistant as more effective, more efficient, and that they have more satisfaction when they use the prototype. There are several qualities and interests of the video game-based methodology, and I will discuss them in this slide. First, the effects of the use of landmarks on wayfinding that have been found in different studies using different methods and that are expected to be found in real life are found with this video game methodology. It means that there is an experimental validity and a fidelity to the real world. Also, environment and settings can be precisely described and they can be reproduced in any lab using Grand Theft Auto 5. There is therefore a real transparency of this method and it is easy to replicate the study. Moreover, all useful settings, like I mentioned before, like the weather, time of day, pedestrian density, heads-up display, and so on, could be operated in-game. I will conclude by saying that this video game methodology represents a low-cost and turnkey solution for all researchers who want to observe the cognitive processes and behaviors that occur in lifelike virtual environments. Price for the lab was just of $20 US, and there was no need for any other lab-made customizations. Of course, there are a few downfalls to the use of a video game as a research tool. You can't change and control everything in a video game like you could do with a lab-made virtual environment. However, this is a very good compromise between the realism and vividness of the environment and the controllability of this environment. For researchers who try to develop a protocol without much time or with little budget or with few people, they can actually achieve a satisfyingly high level of fidelity, a lifelike environment, and substantial methodological qualities just with the features that are already implemented in the game. I want to conclude this talk by thanking you all for your attention. I hope that you enjoyed it, and I hope that it gave you a few ideas for your next project. I am available for your questions now, and I am also available on social media if you have any question after the talk. I remind you that you can also find the complete article of this talk on the website of the International Journal of Virtual Reality. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Romain. We can upload F4 on your keyboard. Okay, is anybody have a question? I see, and yes, you can talk.
Yes. So I'm watching the chat. I think a few people are typing their questions, but if someone wants to ask their question,
Yes, you can write your question in the public chat. Okay, we have one question.
So,
what functionality was missing from the game that you would have liked?
Actually, I have to say that I was surprised by the amount of features that were implemented in game. I did not need a lot of other functionalities to perform the study. However, I'd have to say that the environment is quite difficult to edit. You have to use the actual streets of the game and the actual map. which is a good thing because you have a very well designed environment. Of course, a feature that could have been very useful would be to retrieve from the game data the GPS location of the participants, which is not possible to do. I mean, actually, with the game itself, it might be possible by implementing another customization, but with the game itself, you can't retrieve the exact position of the participants. But since it was not a part of our measurements, it was not a problem.
There is another question.
Yes.
Do you have identified other potential great game for such use?
Well, actually, I think several games could fit a research design and be used as a research tool. Not many of them, of course, because they have to contain an editing feature, which is not really common in lots of video games. But there are lots of shooter games like Far Cry, for example, who have very complex editing features, and you can create a complete environment. However, when you use the framework of a game to create an environment, we come back to the same methodological limit that I was talking about on the beginning of the talk, meaning that you can't offer this environment to other labs so they can perform the same study. So for a video game that you can use as it is, like Grand Theft Auto 5, I think it is currently the best example because you can set all the useful settings, but keep the same environment so people can do exactly the same. If you develop entirely an environment in a video game with an editing feature like Far Cry, you can use it for yourself, but you can't give it to other labs. But I think there might be other games that could be used this way.
Okay.
So,
We have somebody who writes that one of his students is using VR chat to create an environment for an experiment. And you have another question. Your user seems to be quite young. Was this BS intended? Do you plan to try with older users?
So I will answer the first question first. The users were quite young because we performed the study at University of Paris. That's why we recruited lots of students. However, the people didn't have to know how to play a game. They didn't have to be gamers because it was just for them. It was just a screen with Grand Theft Auto 5. But even if they didn't know Grand Theft Auto 5, they could move in the environment. They didn't have to use complex features of the game. They didn't have to perform jumps or use objects. So I think it wouldn't be a problem with older people because there are lots of studies using virtual environments and gaming devices like joysticks and stuff like that.
Okay, thank you, Tommy, for this dance. Romain, can you please refresh your crank wheel?
Oh yes, sorry, I did not. You want me to put something else on the screen?
To refresh your crank wheel, Laval Virtual is recording the presentation.
Oh, okay. So.
It should be okay, guys, because it's the end of the presentation. But yeah, someone from Laval Virtual called me and asked me to ask you to refresh your crank wheel.
Okay.
Yes, but the slideshow is over, so.
Yeah, so it's the end.
Okay.
We have another question.
Yes.
Can we modify the virtual environment within GTA? For example, change the street width. I have another dancer. What kind of parameter can you modify in GTA?
Actually, this is one limitation. Like I said, you can control lots of things and add things in the environment, but you can't change the overall setting of the city. However, the map of Grand Theft Auto 5 was really acclaimed when it was released because it contains lots of different environments. You can move your avatar within a mountain, within a lake, or a desert, or a forest, and stuff like that. So there are also lots of different urban districts with higher buildings and smaller buildings, etc. So you have to explore the map to find the districts that will fit your experiment the most. Unfortunately, you can't change the width of the streets or stuff like that, but you can artificially modify things by implementing objects in the environment. For example, you can put walls and stuff like that. So it is a possibility to adapt the environment.
We have another question, very
Yes.
precise question. Don't you think that the time saved by reusing an existing virtual environment is compensated by the time to analyze the video?
Well, there is a consequent amount of time to analyze data resulting from an experience in virtual environments. So I think no, to answer your question, I don't think so, because the videos can be analyzed, I mean, pretty quickly. You use the software and you just have to watch the videos. Sometimes you can also fast forward on some videos, and you can code them quite easily. So no, I don't think so. Also, the main benefit of using an already made virtual environment, like I said, a chunky solution, is also that you don't have to develop skills to create this environment and to ask for other people to do it for you. So the amount of time that you benefit in the end is, I think, far superior. Yes. Like I said, there are a few downfalls, so you can change everything, etc., etc. But it's really quicker to use this virtual environment.
Okay. I have also a question by myself. The graphic design of the city in your experiments is very pretty and realistic, probably more than what research laboratories can do. Do you think it's a good point or a bad point for research in cognitive psychology? Because your research are not about the beauty of the environment. It's about wayfinding.
Of course. But wayfinding is something we, like I said, we all do every day and in real environments. So the difficulty to generalize the results that are obtained within virtual environments that are empty or that don't feel real might be a limitation. And we wanted to test this environment, which is really vivid with pedestrians walking and cars driving, etc., etc. And since the results we obtained are provide further evidence to the results that are already discussed in literature, we think this is a good option. Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much. We can upload again, Romain.
So, thank you very much for waiting. So my name is Simon LHUILLIER. I work for the Gustave Eiffel University and the University of Paris in France. And I'm going to talk about the use of VR for innovative basic research designs in spatial cognition. And it's going to be a very wide talk, a very theoretical talk, in order to discuss what we can do thanks to VR in the field of the study of spatial representations, and especially in the field of this new method of transgressing reality thanks to VR in spatial cognition. So I'll start right now by saying that studying space from the standpoint of human behaviors and human thinking requires a very different definition of what physicists and mathematicians usually call space. That means that understanding how physical space is structured does not necessarily help us to answer the question of how humans understand space, and because between the actual space and its cognitive representation, there is a brain that transforms information into something else. And this something else, we can describe it as an intuitive reality that provides a context for all activities that humans do, meaning that the brain transforms space into something that is functionally relevant to individuals. And this idea is perfectly in line with the definition of spatial cognition as a scientific research field interested in studying how individuals can acquire, store, retrieve, and manipulate spatial properties of objects and events. So, of course, the current presentation would be dedicated to describing how virtual reality can provide us with new possibilities for this purpose. And I will particularly focus on its use in the context of new methods such as the introduction of local transgressions of reality to study the properties of mental representations of space. So what more can we do compared to conventional basic research thanks to VR? Well, Romain already talked a little bit about this before, but of course, with the evolution of technologies, VR can now achieve better perceptual and psychological fidelity, coupled with better immersion and the increased probability of generating an actual feeling of presence that lead us to think that individuals can now produce realistic behaviors in VR. And this is crucial because it allows researchers to achieve an ideal trade-off between what we could call experimental control, that means reducing the risk of biases caused by undesired sources of variation, and ecological validity, this is the possibility of generalizing the results obtained in the lab to real-life situations. All this can be achieved with optimal security for participants because, as you can imagine, when we are studying spatial knowledge, having participants learn places by actually asking them to go out in the streets and performing tasks is not risk-free for them. From a more design-focused point of view, VR allowed us to create experimental design that could never be done with humans before, such as the use of brain imagery during real-time navigation. And in the same vein, VR also allows the testing of novel situations using innovative protocols, such as, for example, the ability to have participants embody different persons to talk to themselves, as you can see illustrated here with this recent work by Slaters and collaborator. But on a more general dimension, researchers can also create their own environments through VR, which means that this tool can allow us to test situations that could not be possibly observed in real life. So crucially, in the field of spatial cognition, we can now introduce what I will call local transgressions of physics to bend selected aspects of space and observe the consequences of these new situations on spatial learning and performances. This type of experimental design brought a lot of new results in a specific field that I will choose to describe from now as an example, being the study of mental spatial representations and the study of their metric properties. And as you can see here, what we call a spatial representation is the result of a mental mapping process by which individuals acquire, store, retrieve, and decode relative positions in their environments. And to get straight to the point, we classically divide spatial representations theories into two main categories: those who postulate that representations are cognitive maps using two-dimensional isomorphic Cartesian coordinates, and those who model them as topological graphs, which are some sort of semantic knowledge networks that do not preserve isomorphic geometry. Thus, one of the main differences between these two theories is that one assumes a Euclidean structure of geometry in memory, while the other does not. And the distinction has not been easy to study in the past in the field of spatial cognition, and that's why I will now give you an example of how VR can help us to gather insightful arguments about this debate, thanks to the use of local transgressions of geometry. So first example is this interesting study by Zetsch and collaborators in which the authors constructed impossible virtual environments by introducing local transgressions of Euclidean geometry. These violations were either angular irregularities for experiment 1 or planar topology transgressions for experiment 2. And as you can see in figure A, angular irregularities means that angles could be exaggerated when traveled by participants in such a way that the total sum of all angles in a closed path could exceed 180 degrees, which is normally impossible to experience in real life for humans. On the other hand, planar topology violations were made by introducing the possibility of entering the inside of a room from the outside without crossing any boundary, which again is normally totally impossible for humans in real life situations. Participants learned both non-Euclidean and Euclidean control environments by free exploration, and they were then asked to plan and navigate the shortest routes between landmarks as a spatial test. The hypothesis here was that regular control environments should be easily represented in a map-like structure, such as a cognitive map, whereas spatial information extracted from impossible environments should be difficult to integrate in a coherent representation. Thus, if spatial representations preserve Euclidean geometry, then performances should be better for control environments than for impossible environments. And this is not what authors observed here. The results of the study were actually very straightforward. First, neither angular irregularities nor planar topology transgressions prevented participants from finding optimal routes compared to control environments. And second, this was true while participants were not aware of Euclidean geometry transgressions. They just did not notice that some environments were theoretically impossible. So these striking results led authors to suggest that spatial representations could be easily constructed from non-Euclidean spatial information, as no decrease in performances was observed for this type of environment. So it seems there that there is a dissociation between perceptual information, which looks Euclidean-like for immediate distances, and spatial representations which might dispense with Euclidean-like structure. Another striking example of this use of VR can be cited from the work of Verne and colleagues, where participants learned environments containing what we call wormholes or hyperlinks. So these entities are responsible for local transgression of space and time continuity, as they allow participants to seamlessly teleport between 2 points in space. So teleport and rotate in this specific case. This means that wormholes can fold space and time because two spatially distant landmarks can become temporarily close to each other while individuals are moving at constant velocity, which is of course impossible to observe in real life. Again, participants learned Euclidean control environments and non-Euclidean wormholes environments through free exploration, and they were then tested on their ability to produce the shortest routes between landmarks. And again, with this methodology, results show an absence of difference in performances between control and wormholes environments. And more importantly, participants preferentially use wormholes routes because they are effectively shorter. They could be considered as optimal. But they are not aware of the space-time continuity violation. And this led the authors to suggest that individuals could be insensitive to the Euclidean structure of spatial information, which would be in line with not only a topological structure of mental spatial representations, but also with the idea that they could be systematically distorted and non-isomorphic. And this led me to the last example that I wanted to discuss today, dealing with the use of VR for studying more embodied views of spatial cognition. And we are going to see an example of, not this time a Euclidean geometry transgression, but a proprioceptive transgression. To give a brief introduction to what is situated and embodied spatial cognition, this framework classically considers that spatial memory is modulated by body experiences and actions that we perform in our environment, meaning that properties of space are distorted in memory by the body, which could be considered as the primary reference system for spatial information. As a consequence, this implies the existence of multimodal spatial representations that could integrate more information than just spatial properties, such as, for example, the sensory-motor information linked with the energetic cost of walking. And this time again, with the ability to manipulate the degree of interaction that offers VR, it quickly became a fantastic tool to test embodied and situated postulates on spatial representations, and I will now present to you a large study illustrating this specific point. So this study aimed at testing the hypothesis that the energetic cost of walking was integrated to spatial representation and influenced their metric properties such as distance information. For the needs of this study, a large-scale virtual environment has been developed using Unity Engine, and participants had to learn routes and positions of landmarks by physically walking on an omnidirectional treadmill. The main factor of this study was the mean inclination of routes that could be either uphill or downhill. And the most important element of design here is the fact that thanks to VR and thanks to the use of a treadmill, we could introduce a transgression of the continuity between visual energetic clues, like the slopes here, and actual sensory motor information of walking effort, the proprioceptive feedback of walking. This means that physical walking effort was kept constant, so the same energetic cost was experienced for uphill and for downhill routes, which again could not be observed in real-life situations. The hypothesis was that if sensory motor information linked with walking effort is integrated into spatial representations, then uphill routes that are considered costly in terms of effort should lead to the encoding of more distorted distances than downhill routes, only if walking effort is not as costly as expected. So there could be some sort of a recalibration process going on here. So in order to test this hypothesis, participants were asked to learn a route featuring 10 distinct landmarks by following a GPS track, and they then had to fill interpolated tasks before performing the spatial retrieval task, which was in this situation a landmark positioning task on the map. So they had to report landmarks position that they just learned. For the results, we compared map fieldwork participants with the actual positions of the landmarks using bidimensional regression to obtain a global score of distance accuracy between landmarks. And we use this score to compare how uphill and downhill routes differentially influence metric properties of the spatial representation. The idea is that we are going to compare to what extent uphill routes lead to underestimated distances. And you will see this by the look of the results here. So we are comparing mean compression of all distances. Of course, the result of the study showed that all distances were compressed because it's a very classical result regarding the use of VR. But this compression was much more important for uphill routes than for downhill routes. This means that after walking uphill, participants show an important underestimation of distances in memory. And this suggests that violating the proprioceptive priors or the proprioceptive expectations linked with energetic walking force participants to recalibrate metric properties in the spatial representation by underestimating uphill distances. This is a novel result, and it has only been allowed by the possibility of keeping walking effort constant on slanted routes thanks to the use of VR. And it has been allowed by the creation of this situation that cannot be observed in real life. So I conclude quickly. So to sum up my message here, was that from the standpoint of spatial cognition and basic research, VR allowed new possibilities for experimental designs that largely benefited to theoretical frameworks, and it did so thanks to its ability to solve methodological problems that face cognitive sciences, such as the lack of experimental control or the lack of ecological validity, of course. Most importantly, I insisted on the fact that VR enabled the creation of innovative designs and the observation of theoretically impossible situations. In the field of spatial cognition, one of the most striking examples has been, of course, the observation of the effects of implicit local transgressions of both geometry and proprioceptive feedback on spatial performances. Promising results it provided are very encouraging for future research, and we strongly advocate for the use of the local transgression method, as it might bring new insights to many models and theories that could benefit from a certain renewal of experimental designs. And this will be my final words, so thank you very much for listening, and I am open to questions.
Thank you very much. We can applaud. And if you have any question, you can write it in the public chat. Okay, we have some question. For you, always control for cyber sickness when using VR in spatial cognition?
Yes, of course. So you always have. You still hear me?
Oh, yes, yes. Oh, no, I can't hear you. Yes, Simon, I can't hear you. Yes, yes, I think Simon have a problem with his mic.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
I'm sorry, my application just crashed. I had to
Okay,
relaunch it.
no problem.
So yeah, the question was, do we always control for cyber sickness? And
Yes.
of course we have to, because we have to comply to ethical rules, of course, that ask us to make sure that participants do not feel ill at ease when performing the experiment. So we have to always ask them if they are okay, and if they don't, we just stop the experiment right now. But in addition to this control, we also record scales. We use questionnaires to ask participants if they felt a little bit of cyber sickness, and also if they felt like they were the environment and the methods of control were realistic enough for them to produce actual behaviors. And when you have a little bit of lag, for example, between what you present to participants and the actions they are doing, they could both feel that cyber sickness is coming, but also that the environment is not realistic. So these two elements can be very correlated, and we control them systematically.
Okay, the second question is linked first. So you said you measure perceived cyber sickness. Does cyber sickness impact spatial cognition performance?
Yes. Yes, exactly. So when you have suspicions of cyber sickness, you can't use the results at all because participants cannot perform the task. Of course, cyber sickness is linked with bad performances at a spatial task, but I would say cyber sickness is just linked with bad performances at a very difficult task. And we are using difficult tasks because you can imagine that reporting positions on the map for 10 landmarks after only one single presentation is a pretty difficult task for people.
Okay, thank you. Next question. There are a lot of questions. Previous works have looked at reaction time as a mark of Cartesian representation of space in blind and sighted people. How does your added effort methodology affect such observations?
Yes, thank you. So this is a very good question. I never worked with blind people, but I know that their estimation of distances, okay, but I know that their estimations of distances are pretty accurate from the single proprioceptive information. So, of course, I would love to see...
Attends, tu m'entends là? Mais bien sûr que tout le monde te parle.
These guys. So, of course, I would love to see what could perform, or what could be the performances of blind people to this type of tasks, but we can't use the same methodology, and we have to use reaction times as you just said. I don't have examples of what it could be, of how it could be integrated in spatial representations, but this is a very important question for the future. Okay.
Okay. Have you done any research with person presenting cognitive disabilities or memory loss?
The works I'm showing here are from the study of normal participants, healthy participants, I should say, sorry. And one of the next steps, of course, is to have more insights about people that have spatial disabilities. It would be interesting to study, for example, people with vestibular loss that have trouble understanding their rotation in space, the rotation of their body. It could be very insightful, both for the use of this method, but also for the models that are behind, and especially the models of embodied and situated cognition.
Okay, thank you. One last question. I read it. I know that there is a controversy regarding embodied cognition theory compared to regular cognitive theory. How your work about spatial cognition show that embodied cognition is relevant than regular cognitive theory?
Yes, thank you for the question. So, of course, this work do not show that embodied cognition is more relevant. It just gives in an additional argument that maybe proprioceptive effort could be integrated to spatial representations. But there's also a lot of other works that show that proprioceptive effort was not integrated into spatial representations because there was no effect, for example, of active walking, and there's not actually a strong consensus that walking during learning is improving spatial performances, spatial memory performances. So this is still a debate, and I think that using VR and controlling the degree of interaction can help us to give more precise information about the integration of motokinetic information in spatial models, just because before VR, we could just compare walking learning versus non-walking learning. And here, as you can see, we can compare more targeted elements, such as the anticipation of energetic cost and things like this. So, of course, it does not show that embodied cognition is more relevant, but it gives useful information to debate, I think.
Okay, thank you very much, Simon. We can applaud Simon again.
Thank you all. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Now our next speaker is Mr. Nicolas RIBEIRO. from University de Picardie Jules Verne, and Mr. Ribeiro gonna present a study in which virtual technologies are used to evaluating learning performance. Okay, Mr. Ribeiro, are you here? Hello?
Donc first of all, the question is what is memory in a psychological sense, and a broad enough introduction to be to say that memory is what one remembers, of course, and remembering who we are, what we are doing, what we experience, and so on is a very important part of our memory. But does this part is enough? Two certainties can be evoked here about memory. The first certainty is that a person's memory is built on what happened to him or her. And the second certainty is that the abilities of memory is most dependent of the brain. This led to a follow-up question: what is the brain, and how can the brain provide information about how memory works? We can go to the next slide. Okay, so to understand how the brain function with memory, we must consider the most important characteristic of the brain. It's its basic unit, the nerve cell. A neuron is a highly specialized cell that has two particularities, to say the least. First, there is many neurons. You can, yes, perfect. There is many neurons. It is estimated that there are between 40 and 100 billion neurons in our brain. And the second particularity is that they have major purpose. This purpose is to be connected with each other in a dense network. So not only do these cells communicate with each other, but each communication leads to physiological change within the cells themselves. For instance, when a neuron is often activated, this neuron is most likely to create new link, new connection with its neighbors. And if this neuron is activated at the same time as other neuron, it also tends to create new connection. These considerations offer me the opportunity to use one of my favorite quotes. This quote exposes clearly the fundamentals of what it is meant here. To put things clearly and in perspective, this quote is older than the Eiffel Tower and is written by James Mark Baldwin. I'm gonna read it. In speaking of the physiological habits which lies at the basis of retention, we had occasion to find out the complex nature of the disposition or tendency in the mental life to which they give rise. We may suppose both associative connection between localities or elements in the cerebral cortex and the multiplication of this connection in an intricate network of fibrous and cellular tissue. Considering all this connection as constituting the organic counterpart of the associated mental life, we see at once the wide capacity it affords for varied and rotated representation. The stimulus of a single element in the network arouses many connections, first those best established and oftenest repeated, and then others, in varying degree of strength of revival. For instance, for example, we may suppose the memories involved in the sight, touch, sound, written sign, and spoken word of a bell to be thus connected. We can go to the next slide. Okay. So this idea of a dense network that supports cognition and memory is really important and has been widely supported through the last century. This idea has led the field of artificial intelligence to its current state. But if we focus in terms of human psychology, this conceptual view on the brain offers insight into how an individual's memory functions. And we can propose three different points in the next slide. Can propose three different points here for this introduction about memory. First of all, memory is the brain propensity to change in responses to experience. The second proposition is that memory depends on a network of nerve cells. And the last proposition is that within this network, things are associated and related with each other. Okay. Before keep going with memory, I need to tell you about this number. An average person will spend more than 20 years of his or her life sleeping. During sleep, the brain network is not shut down at all, but it is working at full capacity. And we all know that our brain network are reactivated during sleep, and we experience thoughts and dream and so on during our sleep. On the next slide. No, just click, please. Yes. And what we know now is that those networks are reactivated during sleep and are enhanced during sleep. You can click, please, to make appear the okay. And this is really know that memory enhance memory, sleep enhance memory, at least for the things that are directly linked. But it is not well known if the enhancement of sleep operates at associative and or relational level. So to better understand if this enhancement operates at these two levels, we need a task capable of evaluating the associative aspects of memory. So on the next slide, I must present some rationality of such a task. So this task already exists. This task, if you click next, you will see that this task is called the associative inference task. This is a task that has been proposed by Alger and Payne, and within this task, we present two elements. Just stop a moment. We present two elements. These elements are represented by the letter A and B, and we ask the participant to memorize them. Here, this is letters, but those two elements can be anything you could think of. It can be, for instance, a picture of a face. It can be, for instance, a position, a location in an environment, and so on, a sound. So here, this is letter. So you ask the participant to remember the two components, and when you present one part of the component in his or her brain, the second part, here the letter A, is reactivated. In the original associative inference task, there was up to 80 different associations. So, but there is a trick. In fact, the element B is associated 2 times with another element. So B is also associated with C. So when you present again the letter B, okay, you can, when you present again the letter B, the letter A and C are also present. So in other words, A and B are associative because they are part of the same memory trace. They were presented in the same time and space. The letter B and C are associated because they were also associated, and the letter R, A and C are related because they are indirectly related, but they are part of the same brain network and the same memory trace. So this task allows us to investigate 2 levels of association, direct associative and indirectional, and it is a very polyvalent task because A, B, and C can be anything you could think of. So the 3 studies that I will present today, I've used this study. The first study involved 63 participants that were randomly distributed into 2 groups, a sleep group and a wake group, and a delay of 12 hours was proposed between the learning and the recall. The question that was answered with this study was, does memory enhancement during sleep operate at associative and or relational level? The basics of DIT are always the same. First, the period of learning, then you can go to the, okay, then you can click one time. So first learning, then an immediate recognition that serves as a baseline for future comparison. Then there is a period, a delay period. In this study, the group was distributed into 2 groups during this delay. Then there is a delayed recognition. Okay, thank you. And there is delayed recognition for relational aspects and for associative aspects. So the results of this study indicated that that both dimensions of memory were enhanced by this period of sleep. Associative and relational memory benefited of sleep compared to a period of wake. And if we go to the next slide, this demonstrated that sleep is important and valuable for memory performance. We already know that, but this is also important at both associative and relational levels. In the first part of this presentation, I have indicated how memory is based on the brain, and of course, an individual is not just a brain, but we are a whole body, a body, including the brain, that has evolved phylogenetically and ontologically in a three-dimensional world. In order to be effective, one must be able to remember where things are, where things happened, and so on. This simple fact has led to the specialization of certain brain cells. To be explicative of this picture here, every color corresponds to one population of neurons that are near the hippocampal region. And what we know is that during sleep, the neuron implicated in exploring an environment are reactivated in the same sequence than when during the learning. So in other words, if we want to evaluate how memory is enhanced by sleep, it is valuable to evaluate such a link while implicating special components. So the question, if we go to the next slide, you again for this help. If we go to the next slide, we see that the second study involved VR, and 82 participants were implicated in this VR study. They were randomly distributed in the sleep group and the wake group, and the delay was about 40 minutes. This study is available at the EGVR website. So the question is that does sleep enhance memory for special properties of experience at associative and or relational levels? And if you want to evaluate the spatial property of an experience, you need to place a participant in an environment. This is possible in reality, but if you want to do that with experimental control, if you want to have experimental control over what is going on for the participant, a traditional strategy is to use a computer. But if you use a computer, the problem is that the individual cannot follow the environment into the 2D screen. So the best strategy is to bring the computer on the participant head, and with this strategy, the participant have the possibility to freely explore an environment where you can exhibit experimental control. So for this second study, the study that used VR, the environment looked like this. In this environment, there is 12 display stands. In each of display stands, the participant must learn two different objects, one object at a time. So at the end of the learning process, the participant knows two objects for each display stand. So two objects that are related because they were never presented at the same time, and each object is associated with its own display stands. After the learning task, you can propose free recall, immediate recall. So an immediate recall and an immediate associative recognition was proposed. And after those immediate recognition, you can propose the delay Here the delay was composed of sleep or wake, and because there is not so much individual that can take a sleep as at will, the individuals that were involved in the sleep group also allow it to become a rest group for those we don't sleep, which don't sleep during the learning. And after this delay, you can test for delayed evaluation of relational and associative memory. The results for this study shown that free recall will be enhanced after a delay, after a break, no matter the group in which the participants were involved. The second result is that associative memory are enhanced, especially to the sleep and rest group compared to the wake group, and no effect was found for relational performance, in contrary to the preceding study. In other words, once again, sleep proves to be important and valuable for memory performance. Additionally, rest is also important for memory. In other words, if you need to learn something, it is a good strategy. It can be a good strategy to take a break, to take a rest, or to sleep for a short period. So these links works for free recall and associative recall, but they are not significant for relational links. The follow-up question was, what about a full night sleep? Because the first study was on a 12-hour delay, we needed to see if these results were because of the delay. So the third study, you can go please. Yes. So the third study involved 57 participants that were randomly distributed into groups, and the delay this time was the same as the first study. The delay was of 12 hours. The methodology was similar to the first VR study. The environment was exactly the same. The learning phase were exactly the same. The only two different is that we don't propose the free recall, and the delay was about 12 hours. And the result shown that effectively with this 12-hour delay, associative performance is better for individuals who slept, and relational memory performance are also better for person who slept. We also decide to propose a presence questionnaire because as a psychologist, when you try to use VR, the question about presence, acceptability, and immersion comes very quickly. So what we can say about that is that sleep is important for associative features of memory, and sleeps appear to be a robust phenomenon that occur with different periods of time. If we need a catchphrase, this phrase would be to better memorize the place, have a break. And the last word of this presentation is that VR is a suitable, easy to learn, and affordable tool to use for memory research, especially if a spatial property is involved. This presentation is now over. Thank you for your attention. So thank you for the committee, for the chair to have accepted this presentation. Feel free to reach out to me now by email or to any of my collaborators. We are very open to collaboration in our lab. And I would like to thank my colleagues Yannick Binden, Camille Sagnier, Véronique Calino, Émilie Jouescamp that were implicated in this and I am available to answer any question or commentary that you may have about this work.
Thank you. We can applaud Nicolas. Okay, if you have any question, you can write it in the public chat.
So what you can see in my screen, basically, or just this application, yeah.
Yes, you can put it in full screen, maybe.
Yes. Is it better?
Okay, perfect.
So hopefully, yes. So I work at NYU. It's the largest independent research university in the United States. But also it has campuses everywhere in the world. So I will be talking about a case study using immersive text in secondary education. So I guess everybody here have an idea on what is the virtual embodiment, but some discordances can exist as to the concept of computational thinking. So first, let's agree on our definitions. I live on Long Island, by the way, and I defended my idea at Stony Brook University, and that's where we have this beautiful virtual reality cave. Talking about the history research leading to immersive technologies has been conducted since the mid-20th century in such domains as brain-computer interfaces, holography, sound, speech recognition, robotics, and artificial intelligence. In particular, in 1986, Gerald Lanier used the term virtual reality time, and even earlier in 1973, a designer, Alphonse Schilling, described and sketched a contraption with two small monitors in front of the eyes, and this apparatus is considered to be the earliest precursor of a head-mounted display in the 20th century. But even some people say that it was imagined in the 19th century. So as I come from New York, let me say just a couple of words about the New York City Media Lab that coordinates the efforts of the extended reality field in this field by the New York universities. Such universities as NYU, New York University, Columbia University, CUNY, which is City University of New York, both engineering schools and schools of arts and media. So for example, at the NYU Tandon School of Engineering, we have Urban Future Lab. We have like NSF Wireless Center, Internet Center for Advanced Technology, Games for Learning Institute, Media and Games Network, which is called Magnet, which accumulates many labs, also working in the areas of virtual augmented reality, immersive technologies. Of course, NYU is the biggest research university. One of the biggest in US and in New York for sure. Where is that? Yes. So NYU Tandon School of Engineering main campus is in Brooklyn, Metrotech. It's an urban academic industrial research park. University has numerous research efforts, including research partnerships with the Inception Institute of Artificial Intelligence and with major technology firms such as Twitter and IBM. Research in XR at NYU is conducted, so as I said, by many labs. So this is just so New York City Media Lab organizes very frequent events to stimulate entrepreneurship and startups and research. It's all merged in these graduate students from NYU who work at the NYU labs, and then they create their own startups. So we're doing, for example, just small things that are emerging, like eye tracking activated video recommender systems. There's lots of mobile apps like augmented reality GNOME from Amélie Poulain, which is French. So people come from Paris and this New York City Media Lab expose to present, for example, yes, one of the latest demo expo showcases, we saw an industrial robot taught that was taught a smooth movement just with a tilt brush, which is an analog of Kinect sensor, and then it was reproducing this movement of a human hand, like whatever. New York University professors are lecturing using tilt brush, like for storytelling. And we have like Exploring Future Reality meetup, a big congress in November, every November, that presents and nourishes many new virtual reality, augmented reality, and mixed reality developments. So this is just an example like relevant to today's situation, emergency situation. This is 3D simulation that shows why social distancing is so important. So you can go on the link later and see how these droplets move from in between the people. So now in US relates to the secondary education. From my teaching experience, developing computational thinking is not an evident task, and not only in secondary education. As a senior instructional designer at NYU, I develop online courses in master programs. We have attended an online division that a lot of people are working on these courses. So we were confronted challenge when we admitted candidates having a bachelor's degree in humanities, including humanities, to a computer science master's. And even if they proved the work experience in IT field, our bridge course in fundamentals of coding, they seem to need some training that would reorient their approach to understanding the world. A high precision, breakable in simple steps, logical and iterative approach. So our study, this study that I'm talking about, was conducted in the summer for the schoolgirls. So we and demonstrating that virtual embodiment using this method, so via and social channels of e-learning model contributes to teaching computational thinking, and we did some statistical research on the results. So we use 7 computational thinking concepts or metrics to measure this computational thinking, and I will talk about it in a second. So this case, again, this study, it took place on occasion of a summer camp organized by the Stony Brook University Women in Science program. So I did it when I was a PhD student at Stony Brook, and I was supposed to teach 12-year-old girls computer science. So this is the age when, according to Piaget's 4th stage of development, the child enters the formal operational stage and becomes capable of mental manipulation involving the same cognitive abilities as adults, in particular the same spatial abilities, which kind of we shall linked to the associated with digital fluency that we proved in a previous research paper. So students were randomly assigned to 2 groups that experienced the new teaching method in computer science. The difference between the groups was in which order they followed the 2 weeks of during the first week, they learned digital literacy using traditional video-based method. And during the second part of the training, they used the AR apps and tools in a social environment. And that made a difference. So we gave them a pre-test before the first week, then a test validated 100 scored test after the first week, and the final test after the second week. Where is my model? Okay. So the training method used in this study is based on a e-learning cognitive model. That was a subject of my PhD. So its model taking into account the current stage of the art in e-content presentations that have become interactive, highly personalized, and collaborative. So, you can see, in particular, the model shows that e-learning happens via narration, animation, kinesthetic activities, and personalized social applications. Can you see my cursor by any chance?
No, no, no.
Okay, so I'm just going from left to right, from top to the bottom. So you see verbal, visual, spatial, and social abilities allow students or users in non-teaching environment to create in the working memory verbal, pictorial, somatosensory, and social perception models, which in turn associate with prior knowledge from the long-term memory to create new knowledge. And in this particular research, new knowledge consisted in this computational thinking. So what we did during the second week, as I said, that was the most important part. We scanned, the girls scanned each other using the kinetic sensor. You see in green, this is the scanned image of the girl that is sitting there. And so that's how it was self-centered. So because they all participated in it, then they were given their scanned 3D selfie in the software environment, and they manipulated each other's selfies. They colored it, moved it around, filled in the holes when you produce the scanning that it has the holes. So this contributed to this virtual embodiment that they felt the whole time throughout this process. So that's how they modeled this 3D scanned images on the computers, and it was highly collaborative in the innovation lab. And then they 3D printed these selfies, their own selfies, all together. And this is the result of this 3D printing. So these are the worst exemplars, because the best we gave them to the girls. Only the ones that didn't work well, I kept it for myself. And they were very excited. So the point of this research is to show that social emotional part contributes significantly to learning of computational thinking. So on this emotional background, so we invented all these stages of the training, so to keep the girls all the time involved and excited about learning something new, all related to these immersive technologies. Then they did their green screen pictures and uploaded them on their cell phones. So in the mobile app Orasma, now it is bought by HP Reveal, they were able to activate, so when basically clicking on this green screen picture with the background that they choose, of course, it animated a 3D coded animation that they created, that they coded. So they recorded a video, the animation. I cannot advance my slide. Yes, so this is the coding part. That was all preamble, and then for the second week they coded a game using the 3D programming Alice environment, which is free, developed at Carnegie Mellon University. People are still support it everywhere on the wall. So this is a drag and drop coding environment based Java based, but you see it has the difference on Scratch, which is very good to apply at the younger age. Alice has, you see, procedures, functions, scene, methods, and it is object-oriented and event-triggered. So they created a game. Not only it was like all these characters moving. First, they created a scenario, and in the scene, they were manipulating these characters in 3D environment. You see all these arrows at the bottom, horizontal, vertical, and circular. So they had to imagine the angles to which they will turn their objects and how this object will move in the 3D environment. So that's how it was also a surrogate or virtual embodiment. In some research works, it is called surrogate embodiment. And for example, I collaborated with Dr. Black at Columbia University. So they they have an institute where they do research, serious research in the secondary education, element of computational thinking and procedural knowledge. So what is computational thinking? Yeah, is it just understanding of the models, so like development of procedural knowledge? As I said, there are many opinions exist. We took as a reference the 7 MIT computational concept, computational thinking metrics, and because we found them like nearly the same with the elements of computational thinking suggested by Grover P. in 2013. So we tried to make sense of it and apply it to our particular training. So these 7 concepts are important. And when a person is fluent in every of these metrics, scores highly, so we can say that this person developed computational thinking, thinks computationally. So what is that? First, there's abstractions and pattern generalizations, including models and simulations. So models are included in this. Model understanding is included in computational thinking. So for example, for our when we applied to our game development by the girls, we just counted it as a number of active objects that they used in their animation. Then the second metric is systematic processing of information. We used it, we counted like how many functions did they use, operators. The third parameter, symbol systems and representations. So we counted it like how rich their data was, how many measures did they use in their functions. The fourth parameter, algorithmic notions of flow of control. How well do they use sequences? So that's what we counted for this. one, and then the fifth parameter, structured problem decomposition. And so we just counted how many methods and procedures did they use, which refers to, is an indicator of parallelism of thinking. And then we have iterative, recursive, and parallel thinking. That we just counted how many loops did they use in their program. And then conditional logic, so how many conditionals and how many events, because it's event-triggered animation. And then efficiency we just measured as how well did they handle the upload of their animation on the platform. And for the performance, we just measured the length of the animation. For sure, better measures are possible. And then also the last metric is debugging and systematic error detection. So also measured just by the number of interaction on debugging with the staff and with the peers. So we processed some of this data, and as a result, significant improvement of computational thinking was observed in these schoolgirls who never coded before. So this is like a pure observation, non-obstructed, and just to check, because in the previous work we were investigating digital fluency and spatial ability. So we tried to see whether computational thinking correlates with one of those, and so it didn't correlate with spatial ability in this particular study, but it did correlate with digital fluency. And the digital fluency was measured like by an objective test, which is not from a self-reported measure, you know, the satisfaction measure, self-sufficiency, self-reported proficiency. So sometimes it happens, but it was based on the validated test. Software simulation-based test, the scores out of 100. So I don't have time to the future research. I just wanted to say thank you to the Stony Brook University for running this Women in Science and Engineering program in STEM for the girls. It's not only a summer camp, it's also a year-long program where girls come to the campus on the weekend, and then they have a 2-week summer camp. So these are all the technologies that we use in this particular study. And thank you for your attention. And please ask questions, if any.
Thank you very much. We can applaud. Okay, if you have any question, you can write it in the public chat. I can start with the first question. Your e-learning model seems to have the same structures as the cognitive theory of multimedia learning by Richard Meyer. Could you explain the main differences between the two models?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yes, so this model is based on associated systems theory by Carlston, by cognitive model of multi-learning by Meyer and Marino, and the cognitive processing model by Dr. Black and his PhD student Chan, that was suggested later in 2006. Since the Meyer's model was suggested in 2000, multimedia learning has evolved significantly during these 20 years. So that's why I included, how can I go back? So if you look at it, I included 2 more channels. Dr. Richard Meyer from California University. In his model, we had only visual and auditory channels, and we added, Dr. Black added, it's not kinesthetic, he added haptic channel, and we kind of had a more global vision, which is related to the development of the technology and learning, and that's how we added. How can I go back? That's how we added thing. No. Kind of static channel and social emotional.
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much. A question in the chat, do you think your training method could also be useful for older students who want to learn programming, or is it only for younger?
So I hope so. This is the purpose. So I just had an occasion to do this research, so I cannot go upper, but I hope you remember how the model looks like. Yes, so this is our purpose. We want to do further research with the adult learners, and why not? That should work. I don't have any. The research literature exists on abundant research literature exists on the development of computational thinking school students, but very few articles, and maybe not at all, about the development of computational thinking in adults. I did my previous research about the development of the fluency in adults. If you look in my previous works, we were college students at the undergraduate and master's level, and we have demonstrated that it's possible to develop spatial ability and digital fluency of adults using new technologies. So as you see from this article, computational is significantly associated with this, so maybe the chances are, we hope, that it would be possible to prove that thinking can be developed in adults. And you know from neuroscience now, this neural network don't die. The neural cells are regenerated regularly until the very old age, so we have hope.
Okay, thank you very much. This was really interesting. We applaud you again.
Thank you. How can I stop sharing?
Yes, thank you, Mrs. Choubar. Our next speaker is Mrs. Anaelle HILY.
Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, depending on your location. My name is Anaelle HILY. I am an industrial PhD student. I work with the A company, and my research work is co-directed by the RP and 2 LPN laboratories, which are part of the University of Lorraine. So I'm going to present our work entitled Reliability of Virtual Reality for User Experience in Spatial Cognition, and this is an exploratory approach. So recently, there was a great improvement in the accessibility of VR technologies, and this interested various fields, and among them neuropsychology, including spatial cognition. In this field, the use of virtual environments, notably to perform navigation tasks, can bring numerous experimental benefits. So as an introduction, I would like to make a quick comparison between the benefits and limitations brought up by using a real environment or a virtual environment for experimental material. So in a real environment, of course, your participants suffer no intermediaries, so their perception and their movements will be as spontaneous and natural as possible. Very often, if you are testing the layout of a building or in an outdoor environment, such as a train station, then the decor is also already available, so you don't have to spend much time on that. For the limitation, the first one is linked to exterior disturbances because you can't have a high control over variables. Moreover, if you're in an outdoor setting. So this can cause a low reproducibility. Can makes it difficult then to go out of the laboratory to make experimentation in public places, for example. And the last limitation is linked to the evaluation you will be able to make. Since your participants need to move around and travel a lot around the environment, you have to equip them with adaptive technology. It can be also artifacted by the fact that they have to move. Considering the virtual environments, well, it's quite the opposite. You can have a very high control over variables. This is also a possibility to safe travels and access to a wide variety of environments. However, this is rather complex to design. This is also very time-consuming. Participants will also have to use a motor interface in order to travel in the environment, which can cause a possible additional cognitive load. So in some situations, for example, for experiencing public outdoor environments, being able to only use a virtual environment would be very useful. However, we still have to evaluate and compare precisely user experience on both media in order to know in the end if it could be possible to generalize the results obtained in virtual environments. So I will present our work. We designed a comparative study to analyze the impact of the environment media on spatial cognition. So this is a comparison of a situation in the real environment and its digital modeling. The long-term objective of this study is to be able to assess the reliability of virtual environments for spatial cognition applications. So first of all, about related works. Related works about user experience evaluation in spatial cognition show that there are various indicators and evaluation materials which we can choose, which can be used. For example, subjective data, such as the use of self-report questionnaires. So these type of questionnaires are filled by the participants, either before the experimentation, for example, to make a competency self-evaluation, or afterwards, for example, a performance evaluation. Other indicators or evaluation materials exist to collect objective data. For example, physiological indicators. So these include heart rate, muscle activity, electrical activity, for example. And these physiological indicators are particularly interesting to identify, evaluate unconscious phenomena. In spatial cognition study, you can also see the use of biomedical indicators and specifically eye tracker devices, because navigation tasks mostly rely on visual cues. And this allows for the identification of full strategies. See, for example, how the participant will collect information in the environment prior to making decisions. And finally, cognitive measurements, objective data also. These are exercises realized by the participants after the experimentation to assess spatial memory. So spatial memory is divided in 3 dimensions. The landmark knowledge, the route knowledge, and finally the survey knowledge, which is the cognitive map representation. So in most cases, the user experience evaluation is performed using only isolated data. But if we take a look at the cognitive schemes needed to perform a navigation task, or as a complex mechanism, including a locomotor dimension, because the user needs to perceive the environment properly and make coordinated movements according to this surrounding environment. And there is also a cognitive dimension. They need to orientate himself, plan ahead, and make decisions along the way. So in order to evaluate this complex phenomena, we believe that a holistic approach is more adapted. By combining various evaluation materials of user experience, we could this way assess more largely the navigation experience and end up making a more accurate comparison of the impact of the environment media. Here is an overview of our methodology. So we chose as a main task a navigation task. Participants were located on the ground floor of the building, and we would ask them to find and go pick up an object which was located on the underground parking floor of the building. So this forward route was a wayfinding test because they had to look for information in order to find and go collect this object. And then we asked them to come back directly at their starting points. So this backward route consists in a route memory task. Now, in order to evaluate all this task and this navigation task, we combined different types of measurements. Data, which were collected through self-report questionnaires. For the navigation task, we combined behavioral observations and evaluations. We also selected 2 physiological indicators, galvanic skin response sensor and an electrocardiogram sensor, so GSR ECG. We also used an eye tracker device in order to assess the visual strategies of the participants. And finally, we asked them to perform cognitive measurements or exercises after the experiment. All these data are analyzed in order to impact the environment media on the navigation performance and strategies, spatial memory of the environment, and an emotional dimension. So this is the physiological reaction we collected, a reaction to surprising events which were triggered during the navigation task. Now, since we collected both subjective and objective data, we were also able to gap between subjective assessments and objective observations or measurements. Of course, to do this study, we also needed a virtual environment. To design it, we used a design method published by Fuchs and colleagues in 2006, which is also further studied by Simon Ritchie more recently, Simon Ritchie and colleagues. It's a human-centered method, which consists in identifying the need of the user at different levels in order to design and adapt the virtual environment accordingly. First level is the functional level, to identify what is expected from the user and therefore what should be allowed to do in the virtual environment. In our case, for a navigation task, it is mostly based on the ability to travel around and observe the environment. Now, in order to travel and observe this environment, the cognitive level needs the correct information regarding distance and depth perception. To make these choices, we based it on a related study. So, for example, we chose to implement a rich visual cues environment and also integrate realistic textures. Finally, on the sensory motor level, we made the interface-related choices. So, for the movement, it was a free rotation using the head-mounted display tracking system, and the translational movement was controlled with the joystick. As for the interaction with the different objects in the environment, we simply used the controller and the trigger of a button. So here you can see an overview of the final environment. I'll be optimistic and decide that the right one is on the left and the virtual one on the right. Since the user in this environment needs to know how to move around and interact with objects such as doors to open, the objects one has to pick up in the underground parking lot, we also added a learning phase in order for the participant to get used to the interface and lower a possible additional cognitive load at the beginning of the experiment, which might bias data collected. To do so, we made a very simple environment, regrouping the different objects the person had to interact with. Take the time to interact with each of these objects, and the navigation task was only triggered when the user would feel ready. We performed the first experimental test to observe the different constraints and limitations, and also identify areas of improvement. The population included 13% the real environment group and 8% in the virtual environment group. Tell a bit the equipment which were used. So of course we collected the same data in the virtual and real setting. We used an eye tracker system, which is built in the HTC Vive Pro Eye head-mounted display we used. For the real environment we use the Pupil Labs eye tracker glasses. Physiological sensors, we use an electrocardiogram, which is a belt which was placed right under the chest, and also a galvanic skin response sensor, which was equipped on the non-leading hand of the participants. So we used the T-sense sensors developed by TA. So in the real environment, since the participants needed to move around and change floors, we had to use a mobile receiver case. It was placed in a bag attached around their waist, only to the other sensors they were wearing. Here are some of the first results of the cognitive measurements. So the first table indicates the average number of errors performed on the landmarks location task. The task was performed after the experiment. Participants were asked to relocate different landmarks on a map of the building. So for now, there is no clear tendencies between the two groups, but the real environment group with an average error of 4.9 against 5.1, sorry, for the virtual group is slightly more performance in this landmark knowledge task. Two figures below present the gap between estimated and effective duration on the left and estimated and effective distance on the right. So in these first results, the virtual environment group made more accurate estimations, both in duration and distance covered. So, however, this is a very exploratory first results, so it needs to be strengthened before being criticized through statistical testing. First aim of this study was to identify limitations and constraints, and we did meet technological constraints. Experienced signal loss, for example, with the electrocardiogram, as you can see on the curve below, and also with the eye tracker device, mostly due to cable disconnection. So we already improved the robustness of the receiver case in order to have a more working, higher reception capacity. We also suspect that signal loss and the cable disconnection were linked to the fact that we had difficulty to position the equipment correctly at the beginning of the experiment. And this is also something we heard from the participants during the user feedback sessions. People were very focused on the sensors and not to touch the electrodes or not move them around too much. So this might firstly have been distracting for them, but also this might have hindered their movements during the experiment. So we are working right now on a way to improve the ergonomics setup in order for the sensor to be perceived as less invasive. Now about the virtual group, users reported as navigation difficulties, and we could see that some of them used the controller in the wrong manner, but there was also a feeling of dizziness. The environment was perceived either as very safe or anxiety-inducing. We hypothesized that the participant who felt anxious might have been the same one who experienced the navigation difficulties. And we also collected general remarks about the environment, like that the sound of environment felt too empty. These feedback sessions also helped us identify the limitation of our study, which is the use of a joystick to move around the environment. To work, we would like to explore the possibilities of the redirected walking techniques. Be a good option to allow the user to walk freely in large-scale environments, while being in a restricted area. To conclude this presentation and discuss the prospects, so we would like to validate first the modifications and improvements we made to the protocol and also the virtual environment by performing a new experimental test. The objective after that being to plan a measurement campaign on larger scale in order to collect more data and progress on the comparison of user experience in a real and virtual environment regarding spatial cognition. However, the first results are encouraging and also support the holistic approach. Our research team is composed of researchers with various expertise in neurosciences, psychology, and engineering. And this has helped to have a more global understanding of the experimental situation, and also had to face the different challenges encountered. It was also very useful develop a protocol and a virtual environment, which takes into account both the human dimension, so it's cognition and perception, and also the different technological requirements. Ends my presentation. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'm all ears for your questions.
Thank you, Anaelle. So if you have a question, you can write it. Okay, we have question. How do you estimate the importance of non-visual sensory information like sound, spatial audio, and walking incline kinesthetic sensations?
Well, right now we are trying to create a similar to create a virtual environment which allows a similar user experience between the virtual environment and the real environment. And after that, we hope that we will be able to vary the different parameters composing the virtual environment in order to isolate which are the parameters that truly need to be implemented in a virtual environment for spatial cognition applications.
Okay.
So for now, there is no way to give an estimation, but this is one of our long-term objectives also.
Okay. You please elaborate on what causes signal loss, which the eye tracker in the HTC Vive Pro Eye, according to you and with your setup?
So the signal loss we experienced with the eye tracker device was not on the head-mounted display, but in the real environment. So this was mostly due to cable disconnection, moving around while people move their arms. They just pushed the cable which disconnected. So there was no issue for now with the HTC Vive. We could collect the data correctly, but the analysis is still ongoing.
Okay. The pedestrian and car traffic was not reproduced in the virtual environment. There was no traffic in the real world.
So there was no dynamic events in the virtual environments indeed. As a matter of fact, there was in the real world. So this is also a limitation we identified. And we think that it's too complicated to have a dynamic event taking place in the virtual environment and then reproducing it exactly in the real environment. So next step would be to have the most control possible over the real environment and try to experience it in the same condition without people being around or cars driving by.
Okay, I continue to read question. To change floors in the virtual environment, the participants used teleportation. It's because there was nothing on the stairs to help them to perform the task. Why not using the joystick to go up the stair, or why not performing the task on the same floor?
So we chose teleportation over just a simple translational movement going down because we thought this would be too much of a dizziness result. We chose teleportation because of that. As for why not do this on the same floor, it's because we really did the exact same experiment between the virtual and the real environment. So we wanted to the user experience as close as possible, and teleportation seemed to be the best way.
Okay. How are you modeling such senses in VR? The audio scene was very sterile. It turned totally absent, making the real world full of distractions and the VR world very simple, and too simple.
So indeed, for now, well, we limited the audio scene to what we could hear while we were in the parking lot. So this means there was the air conditioning system for example, and we also implemented audio events, so the sound of a car locking, the doors locking. This is something we still have to explore, actually. For now, we focused on the methodology and the different evaluation means, but this dimension was not considered as pre-model in this first step. And considering the user's feedback, this is something we will have to work on.
Okay, Brian asked, did you model the acoustics of the space?
So to design the virtual environment, we used the Unity game engine. So the space localization and different physics were already taken into account the way Unity does.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much. We applaud you again.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mrs. HILY. Our next speaker is Mr. Giovanni Arbalaez, sorry, from Université de Lorraine. He's going to talk about the development of a tool for ergonomic assessment in a virtual environment.
So, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Giovanni Arbalaez. I'm a researcher at the RPA laboratory of the University of Lorraine. And I'm also part of a joint research lab that's called Numino, that is a joint research lab between RP and the company TEA. And so in this research lab, we are interested in developing tools for analyzing human interaction in different environments. So this is a project that is funded by the French National Research Agency, ANR. So I'm just going to give a brief introduction why we are interested in this field. So RP is a research team that is interested in innovation and design processes. And we are in particular more interested in the early design phases. So try to really understand when we are designing something, what is going to happen when the product is going to be developed. And TA developed sensors and software for the analysis of human behavior in particular. And so in this work, we were working together trying to develop a tool that will help us to understand what's happening when we are trying to design a workplace situation. So one of the first things that got us into this subject is that we start from one idea is that musculoskeletal disorders are still accounting for about 87% of professional injuries in France. And those are the numbers in France, but they are not much different all around the world. And now we see that in particular in the manufacturing industry with trends of Industry 4.0, that there are intention to enhance human operator capabilities with increasing the number of interfaces and sensors and information that is available for the operator. But at the same time, we see that there's an added risk because we are adding more complexity to the task. So we were asking ourselves how to design these future work settings while preventing at the same time the risk, possible MSDs, and considering future use situations. So we have in the field of ergonomics, in particular, a lot of tools and can be useful. We saw that there are in current economic interventions, there's a lot of measurement that it's done manually and a lot by observation of the task. So the observation is really a really important part of the process, but it could vary from one expert to the other. And we also can see that simulation and VR in particular offer a lot of possibilities to test use situations. There's still a need for a tool that can help us to link both of them, a system that can be able to provide the facility to assess human factor and ergonomic of future task scenarios. So we went on to look what is available on the literature. So I encourage you to go to the paper to see more of the details, but if I tried to summarize what we found, we were in particular interested in systems, ergonomic assessment systems that are VR compatible, because as I already said, the interest is to try to assess while the future operator or the future participant is trying to perform the task. And we saw there are basically two types of system for the motion capture: optical based and IMU based. And while the majority of systems use optical based because they are more precise, we saw that this might be a limit, because if test this future situation in a testing environment, and then this situation is deployed in a manufacturing setting, for example, and then we try to test, we will have the optical based system to a different setting. But with IMU based systems, can easily transfer the sensors from one setting to the other. So we thought that this could be a really interesting feature that in this type of systems. In terms of ergonomic analysis, we said that there's a lot of temporal and multimodal systems capabilities, but we didn't found, and this is something that is usually done in ergonomic interventions, is be able to decompose the analysis, decompose the task for the analysis. So, for example, deploying a coding scheme, and this is something that we did not found in the tools that are available on the literature. So, with all this analysis of the existing systems, we went on to try to design a system to perform ergonomic analysis of work setting, and by allowing users to perform the future task. And we highlight like 4 of the main features that this kind of system should have are to be able to validate a design, like doing the first analysis situation, and allowed to test once the system is deployed. Because we might, during the design phase, even if we try to see all the possible situations, there might be some of them that we might not see. And this is also the idea, to have a system to be able to, once the system is deployed, be able to test in real situations. Temporal and multimodal integration, temporal analysis and multimodal integration is something that we see that it's interesting to have, and in particular, that composition analysis, as I already said. So this is the architecture of the system that we design. It is based on, first, the IMU units. So those are motion captures sensors that are placed on the participant, and they transmit to a software. This is the captive software from TEA. That is an ergonomic analysis software. And so all the motion data is transferred to the system and recorded in the system. And we are also connecting with a VR scene in Unity. So the user will wear a HMD system to see what the scene, and with the information from the motion capture system, we are streaming also that information to the VR scene. So at the same time, the user is seeing avatar that it's replicating the movement from the user. So the user can see if he moves a leg, so he will see that the leg is moving in the VR scene. And this is done. So the part that was developed next is that in Unity in particular, we developed a plugin that allows to collect and transfer the data from the sensors to the VR scene. Also, as I already said, we wanted to be able to include facilitate the coding of the different tasks. So we added the possibility to code the trigger different coding scheme with different situations that are performed by the participants. An example is that imagine that we're analyzing a situation where the user has to interact with a certain object. So every time the user interact with that object in the VR simulation, we trigger this event to the coding server, and it's then sent to the captive software that record it at a certain given moment, and this will facilitate at a later stage, at the analysis stage, the analysis. And so I'm sorry that I don't have the video. It will be easier to show the example, but here you have the participant wearing the sensors all around its body, and with a HMD, using just an HTC Vive. So one example that we developed is a simple warehouse and storage task design. So you have here the participant wearing the sensors and the HMD, and this is the scene. So you see it's simply a warehouse, and the task he has to carry on a trolley where there are some boxes with different size and shapes, and they have he has to go around on the shelf and find out where is the appropriate location for each box, and then place all the boxes in its correct location. So it's a really simple task, but it's a task that is really found on storage and warehouses. So we have the participant seeing the simulation and doing and trying to perform tasks, going around the warehouse and trying to put the boxes in the correct locations. So with this, and then this is what the data analysis interface looks like. So you might, those that have used CAPTRI, this is the familiar, it's a familiar interface. You have here the video from the scene when the participant performed. You have here, you can also add the video from an external source. This is the participant while he was performing the action from an external video. And at the same time, we have the information of on an avatar, highlight, for example, join and angle and movement, given a certain values, certain parameters. Here at the side, you have the temporal analysis that it's common on this type of systems that you have for each join and articulate. You have the different values, so you can see at moment the simulation of the test the values. But here on the bottom, you might see that we added what I told in the first part. We divided the task in several steps, like when he's carrying a box, when he's pushing a trolley, when a big box is being carried, or when he's not carrying anything. So we can code already automatically while the person was performing the task, and this will facilitate later the analysis because we can then see all the moments that where people were carrying the box, the different measures. Here in this task also, because the shelves have different heights, so we decided to use this coding also to analyze the different heights. So we can have also this type of analysis. So if we can have a detailed analysis by sensor. So here, for instance, we have the back sensor, and this is forward flexion. And so we have the different values. The different colors represents that we can find what it's an acceptable value, and this will be highlighted in green. Then we can define another range of values that is is medium or tolerated, will be highlighted in orange, and then we can highlight a certain number of values that are supposed to be dangerous, or if the person's flexing is back more than 80 degrees, so this is a position that is not really a good position to be held a long time, so this is going to be highlighted in red. So we can analyze how many times those different values were held during the task, and then we can also, as already said, that go on to the different measurements. Here we can analyze by height, which is the height that caused the most problematic values. Particular here is that it's really in the lower ground level and 700 centimeters level that are causing most of the problems. And with this information, we can go on and see on the task and say, okay, the lower shelves are problematic. How can we modify this? And how can we improve this? Try to avoid lower shelf or modifying the task. So this is just an example of the tool that we developed. As I say, the idea is to have a tool that will help improve cognitive ergonomic in design of settings. I showed an example of a work setting, but we think that it could be used on different types of situations. The use of IMUs will facilitate to us the real situation once the solution is deployed. As I say, the interest with this type of portable is that we can test on a lab the situations with users, but at the same time we can later go on the manufacturing floor and test on the real situation. The example that I show is mostly based on motion analysis, because this was what we were developing at the beginning. But as I say, model analysis is something that really adds more value to the analysis of the situation. So we can eye tracking, heart rate, or other type of physiological measures. And this is something that is already deployed. The talk that Anaelle showed, the effort that was used was this one. So she's already including this type of measurements. And here I only show you a case study that's really an example when we were developing. So we still have to do more text testing and experimentation on real situations to keep improving the system. So for me, thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. We can applaud you. Okay, if you have
There are any questions?
No sound.
Any question? Sylvain, are you here? Okay. Okay, I have a question for you. What are the advantages of the inertial motion unit, your EMU, compared to the other motion capture system? For example, optical or electromagnetic.
Optical systems, like when we look at the literature, so that the optical based systems, those that are commercially available, there seems to be more precise with highly dynamic movements. But we also found a study from Peters from 2 years ago that compare opticals and IMUs, and actually for the type of tasks that we can find on manufacturing floors that are not that that don't have high speed, the IMUs can be completely comparable to motion to optical based systems. And the other advantage, and this is the reason why we choose to this type of system, is that when you are testing, we can do and test on a manufacturing floor directly near to the machines with this type of system, and then we can move to another room and test, because it's the participant that is wearing the sensors, are not placing it all around the room. So this is something that we think is really useful when we are testing type of situations. In the case of an optical system, you have most of the time you have a dedicated room, and you can easily move it to a different setting.
Okay. Another question in the chat. Okay. I have another question. Do you think your system architecture could be used in a health field, for example, for motor rehabilitation? The measures are accurate enough for this field?
Yes, I think. Like if you have real-time feedback, the system that we have with the architecture is giving real-time feedback and is accurate enough. Then the difficulty will be in the development of the environment. What you want the person to do, or what will be the type of situations you want to develop.
I think Sylvain is here now.
Yes, I was disconnected.
You crashed? Okay.
Yeah. I have a question. Does your solution, Captive, allow to do things with participants with motor disabilities in wheelchairs, for example?
Yes. Yes. Like, I was thinking that one of the limitations might be with the movement if you are wearing a helmet, but you can have a wireless system, so I don't think that could be a problem. Yeah.
Yes. This is one of your use case or not?
Not at the moment. We haven't tried, but that will be something that would be really interesting to explore.
You can imagine in the future to deal with that. Okay.
Okay, can you see my screen now?
It's okay.
Perfect. Well, I think we can start now. Okay, well, my name is Mariela Martinez. I am so grateful to be here. Well, I am a psychologist. I am MBA. I am from Costa Rica. There is like 10 a.m. here in Costa Rica. Actually, I'm a student at the University of Lorraine. I am also a professor at the Business School of University of Costa Rica. This work was developed as a part of a collaboration between RPA to LMP under the project of the Cognitive of the University of Lorraine. Also, it benefits the NHuman InnoLab.com, led by RPI and the T company too. The authors of this work are Maria Martinez, Giovanni Arbeláez, Laurent Dupont, Anaelle HILY, Mauricio Camargo, Crystal Jacob, and Jerome Tinet. All of them are from the university and from the lab and the T company too. And the name of our project is Sociological Assessment of User Experience, supported by immersive environment. This one is the first input from a literature review. As a kind of an abstract, this study considered how the user experience has been measured in an immersive environment. They are a common measure that includes, for example, questionnaires or self-reported forms. However, there is also an increasing way to understand the experience using biometric data. That it has been using also a technology tools. The biometrical provides, as you know, a complementary understanding of the behavior and also of the performance in immersive virtual environment. That is why we focus on some papers from the main databases, and we did a systematic review. We trying to identify how biometrical tools were used and what properties they evaluate. In the context of this work, well, the immersive or virtual environment have been increasingly its importance because of the multidisciplinary application. For example, we can find the application of virtual environment in health, in medicine, also, for example, in psychology, human behavior, of course, in innovation and user experience. That is why it's so important to better understand the user experience on the immersive environment, to improve it and to prove also its functionality. As we said before, there are some methods for evaluating immersion, including biometrical technologies. But before we begin to identify the biometrical tools, we must try to identify what the immersion really is and what are these properties. Once we have the immersion properties, we can start to identify what are the biometrical tools used to evaluate it. At this point, we found a job made by Laurent Dupont and the authors. This study consists in like an ice tree, which describe the properties and of collaborative experience and immersive experience. So we use this model, we use this proposal to understand better the immersive experience and its properties. We have, for example, that they use real-world disassociation as a property of immersive experience. They also use perceptual immersion, cognitive immersion, social immersion, and emotional immersion. So they have the basis of what to study to verify the immersion experience, but with this study, we can help to identify what type of biometrical technologies can be used to measure them. Okay, that is why our objective of this study is to propose a systematic review of the literature on biometrical devices used for evaluation in experience in an immersive environment or as well in virtual environment. The first step that we did, we start in a Scopus database and we extract 1,850 articles published by 2020. We search in articles and conference papers. We use some keywords. For example, we use immersive and those papers that use immersive environment or virtual environment, or immersive or mixed reality or virtual reality, and biometrical or physiological. At this point, after this, we start the second step, that were analyze all the 1,850 papers that we found in the first step. We wanted to analyze them with, we use a iOS software to analyze the co-occurrence approach of the keywords. In this image, you can see some circles. Each circle represents the keywords, and its size or its diameter represent the frequency of the occurrence that in the papers that use these keywords. And so the big the circle is the oftenest that the word were used. Also, we can see some of them are closer between them. So the closer two words are located, the stronger the relation is. And the collection of those keywords having strong relationships create a cluster. And each cluster are represented by different colors. So we can identify here 4 main clusters. We can see, for example, the yellow one have some keywords. For example, computer simulation is the biggest, so is the most used keyword in this cluster. We can say with the yellow one that the computer interface simulation and article were used as a tool of virtual environment studies. Also, we have the red one. The main keyword here is virtual reality, but also there are some words, for example, human-computer interaction. So we can determine that virtual reality and human-computer interaction use physiology and physiological responses as well. Then we have the blue one. The words related here are heart rate, emotion, anxiety, attention. So those variables, as a heart rate, emotion, anxiety, and others, are variables used in virtual reality environment, and this image confirms this. Also, we have the green one that is related more with some words like movement memories. So we can identify that those keywords may reflect the aims or the objectives of the researchers. At this point, after this, we want to do a qualitative analysis. So for this, we use a new filter. We use a new filter that is, we use in Scopus the proximity operator that is called W50. It does a tip to be sure that all the terms appear in the same paragraph. After applying this filter, we found 530 papers. And then we use the exclusion criteria of English publication, and we exclude also the duplicate papers, and the total funded were 515 papers. After this, we hold qualitative analysis, and we select 153 papers as the most relevant. We select here the papers that were related directly with immersive environment. We exclude, for example, some literature review papers or non-English languages. And at this point, we start this qualitative analysis. Okay. With those 153 papers, we classify them on different categories using the aim or the application of the study. We found 5 main categories here. For example, we can see that improved effectiveness of virtual environment is the most studied application. After this, we have, for example, psychological proposals. Some of the jobs were made just for simulation or for health application, and some of them were used in education or for education purposes. We also try to identify or we categorize them according to biometric device used. For example, here we can find 3 big categories. We have common technology. For common technology, we refer to those technologies that have been used frequently in this kind of studies in immersive environment or virtual reality. Non-typical are those that already exist, but for example, for immersive environment or for virtual environment are not frequently found in those studies. Probably are common, for example, in medicine or in health, but for immersive environment are not that common. So we call them not typical technologies. And also we found that some of the research develop their own technologies, or some of them combine some technologies and create an integrating system. So we call them original technologies. We have here, we found that 82% use the common technologies, 15% use non-typical technologies, and 4% of those papers create their own original technologies to study immersion or virtual reality. In common technologies, we found here that the most common technology were those related with skin conductance. After this, we found some EEG. Brief frequency is one of the most used technology too. The less common technology here were eye tracker, or some used for ocular exploration. And after this, we analyze the non-typical technologies. As we said before, those probably were used in health or medicine, but not common use in this kind of environments. So we found, for example, transcranial Doppler, body forces, ventilation, oxygen consumption, and some of them. And in original technologies, there are some new technologies. For example, the neuropathy that were developed to measure electrothermal responses. However, there are some, for example, the virtual reality medical center, they doesn't create like a new technology. They just combine technologies already existent and create a new integrative system. So there are some of the original technologies. After this, we also classify the properties studied. From all the documents, we identified those who were using the variables included in NICE tree. For example, we can see here that the real world disassociation is not studied at the moment. Of course, it doesn't use the technologies because it's not studied yet. However, for example, in perceptual immersion, the most common property study for those papers were the self-presence with 21 papers. And in this one is the only one that used the different type of technologies. So we can see here that they use the common technologies. Everyone is the common technologies. The blue one is the original. They use OpenVivi. There is one original technology. And they also use the non-typical technology of oxygen consumption and ventilation. It's the only one that uses the three kinds of technology that we found. After this, we found that emotional immersion is one of the most element studied, related also with immersive experience. For example, in attention, it's commonly to find that the skin conductance, the heart rate, the eye activity, the respiration rate, brain activity, and muscle activity are related or are used to study the attention as well. Needs and engagement are also some of the most studied properties. In engagement, for example, they use salivary and less, and we can see here that all that related with emotional immersion use this one. This salivary amylase is related with the cortisol, and the cortisol obviously is related with the stress. So it's logical to think that emotional immersion, of course, have to be related with the cortisol or the stress hormone. Well, we can see, for example, in social immersion, yes, we found that social interaction is common to use skin conductance or hair rate. However, in co-presence is not studied yet with some biometrical tools. In sensory engagement, for example, we found just one study, but this one study used 3 different technologies. Engagement used 3 different technologies, so we can't say that one technology is just for one property. It's not correct. As you see, some different biometrical tools help to identify or to study different one property as well. Here, and after this, we select these 26 studies because they were focused exclusively in immersion study and not in other types of or application. So we select just the papers that were focused or have in their variables of the study the immersive as a variable. We're trying to identify if they use the I-strip variables or what other properties they're used to identify or to study an immersive environment in immersion. So we found that 58% use only the structure variables and its properties. However, we found that the I structure were mixed with another variables. Okay, so we have here 19%, and the rest, 33%, use only other variables. We try to identify which are those other variables, and we found that were anxiety and stress. However, as you can see, all of them use the structure variable. So it's important, and we are going to refer this in some conclusions. Okay. One of the most important conclusions that we can take from this study is that this study contributes to mapping of the links and the connection of the uses of biometrical devices, because we have seen the increasingly use of biometricals, but we don't know why or what are they studying with these biometrical tools. So it represents like a literature review to help to identify what are they studying and what properties have been used to measure with biometrical data. Also, we identified the categories used in this in virtual environment. As a second conclusion, we found that the I3 structures includes all the immersion study variables. Stress and anxiety were not included specifically in the I structure. However, they can be integrated in the emotional property that the I3 proposed. I think this reflects how strong the I3 is and how complete it is. So it can be used for another authors or in other investigation. They can use the I3 as a reflect or as a base to study immersion, because it also includes all the variables that had been studied from 2020. Another conclusion is that the availability of biometrical tools coincide with the most studied properties, or in other words, those that have been studied at least are the ones that have less biometrical tools available. I think this represents a great opportunity not only to study the variables proposed in the I3, but also to develop, to generate more research, or to propose physiological tools that will allow them to be studied. Because it can help that those variables that we see before that are not studied yet, maybe it's because they don't have enough tools to measure with physiological measure or physiological evaluation. So this is all the presentation. Thanks for your attention and for listening. I don't know if you have some question.
Thank you very much, Mariana. We can applaud you.
Thank you.
Okay, if you have some question, you can write it in the public chat. Okay, I have a question. In your paper, in the figure 3, we can see the type of measurement for the different variables, and I was surprised to see that there is no physiological measure identified for psychological flow.
You refer to
yes, here. Flow, where it is.
Yeah, we didn't identify some biometrical tools used in this property. Probably because we, as we said before, probably there are not enough biometrical tools related with this property, or it doesn't exist yet. So it represents a great opportunity to find a new way to evaluate them.
Yeah, okay. There is another question in the chat. What are, in your opinion, the 2 or 3 physiological assessment systems that are essential for a good evaluation of the user experience?
Okay,
If you had to choose only 2 or 3 physiological assessment systems to measure user experience.
Yeah, probably well, the most commonly assessment or biometrical tools were skin conductance. So I can say we can use them. I can recommend to study biometrical. However, it will depend on what are you trying to study, because as you see, this skin conductance is very helpful. But it gives you a lot of information. So I think it depends on what property you need you want to study, because as you can see in this image, you have most of them complement with another biometrical tools. So it depends on what are you trying to study. For example, in social interaction, you can use it as well in sensory engagement, for example. So it depends what are you trying to study to complement the skin conductance with another tools to really identify what you want to study.
Okay, thank you very much. Another question?
My name is Mariela Martinez. I am so grateful to be here. Well, I am a psychologist. I am MBA. I am from Costa Rica. There is like 10 a.m. here in Costa Rica. Actually, I'm a student at the University of Lorraine. I am also a professor at the Business School of University of Costa Rica. This work was developed as a part of a collaboration between RPA to LMP under the project of the Cognition of the University of Lorraine. Also, it benefits the NHuman InnoLabCom led by RPA and the T company too. The authors of this work are Mariela Martinez, Giovanni Arbeláez, Lauren Dupont, Anaelle HILY, Mauricio Camargo, Crystal Jacob, and Jerome Tinet. All of them are from the university and from the lab and the T company too. And the name of our project is Sociological Assessment of User Experience, supported by immersive environment. This one is the first input from a literature review. As a kind of an abstract, this study considered how the user experience has been measured in an immersive environment. They are a common measure that includes, for example, questionnaires or self-reported forms. However, there is also an increasing way to understand the experience using biometric data. That it has been using also a technology tools. The biometrical provides, as you know, a complementary understanding of the behavior and also of the performance in immersive virtual environment. That is why we focus on some papers from the main databases, and we did a systematic review. We trying to identify how biometrical tools were used and what properties they evaluate. In the context of this work, well, the immersive or virtual environment have been increasingly its importance because of the multidisciplinary application. For example, we can find the application of virtual environment in health, in medicine, also, for example, in psychology, human behavior, of course, in innovation and user experience. That is why it's so important to better understand the user experience on the immersive environment, to improve it and to prove also its functionality. As we said before, there are some methods for evaluating immersion, including biometrical technologies. But before we begin to identify the biometrical tools, we must try to identify what the immersion really is and what are these properties. Once we have the immersion properties, we can start to identify what are the biometrical tools used to evaluate it. At this point, we found a job job made by Laurent Dupont and the authors. This study consists in an ice tree, which describe the properties and of collaborative experience and immersive experience. So we use this model, we use this proposal to understand better the immersive experience and its properties. We have, for example, that they use real-world disassociation as a property of immersive experience. They also use perceptual immersion, cognitive immersion, social immersion, and emotional immersion. So they have the basis of what to study to verify the immersion experience, but with this study, we can help to identify what type of biometrical technologies can be used to measure them. Okay, that is why our objective of this study is to propose a systematic review of the literature on biometrical devices used for evaluation in experience in an immersive environment or as well in virtual environment. The first step that we did, we start in a Scopus database and we extract 1,850 articles published by 2020. We search in articles and conference papers. We use some keywords. For example, we use immersive and those papers that use immersive environment or virtual environment or immersive or mixed reality or virtual reality and biometrical or physiological. At this point, after this, we start the second step that were analyze all the 1,850 papers that we found in the first step. We wanted to analyze them with, we use a BioS software to analyze the co-occurrence approach of the keywords. In this image, you can see some circles. Each circle represents the keywords. Its size or its diameter represent the frequency of the occurrence that in the papers that use these keywords. So the big the circle is the oftenest that the word were used. Also, we can see some of them are closer between them. So the closer two words are located, the stronger the relation is. And the collection of those keywords having strong relationships create a cluster. And each cluster are represented by different color. So we can identify here 4 main clusters. We can see, for example, the yellow one have some keywords. For example, computer simulation is the biggest, so is the most used keyword in this cluster. We can say with the yellow one that the computer interface simulation and article were used as a tool of virtual environment studies. Also, we have the red one. The main keyword here is virtual reality, but also there are some words, for example, human-computer interaction. So we can determine that virtual reality and human-computer interaction use physiology and physiological responses as well. Then we have the blue one. The words related here are heart rate, emotion, anxiety, attention. So those variables, as heart rate, emotion, anxiety, and others, are variables used in virtual reality environment. And this image confirms this. Also, we have the green one that is related more with some words like movement memories. So we can identify that those keywords may reflect the aims or the objectives of the researchers. At this point, after this, we want to do a qualitative analysis. So for this, we use a new filter. We use a new filter that is, we use in Scopus the proximity operator that is called W50. It does a tip to be sure that all the terms appear in the same paragraph. After applying this filter, we found 530 papers. And then we use the exclusion criteria of English publication, and we exclude also the duplicate papers, and the total funded were 515 papers. After this, we hold qualitative analysis, and we select 153 papers as the most relevant. We select here the papers that were related directly with immersive environment. We exclude, for example, some literature review papers or non-English languages. And at this point, we start this qualitative analysis. Okay. With those 153 papers, we classify them on different categories using the aim or the application of the study. We found 5 main categories here. For example, we can see that improved effectiveness of virtual environment is the most studied application. After this, we have, for example, psychological proposals. Some of the jobs were made just for simulation or for health application, and some of them were used in education or for education purposes. We also try to identify or we categorize them according to the biometric device used. For example, here we can find 3 big categories. We have common technology. For common technology, we refer to those technologies that have been used frequently in this kind of studies in immersive environment or virtual reality. Non-typical are those that already exist, but for example, for immersive environment or for virtual environment are not frequently found in those studies. Probably are common, for example, in medicine or in health, but for immersive environment are not that common. So we call them not typical technologies. And also we found that some of the research develop their own technologies, or some of them combine some technologies and create an integrating system. So we call them original technologies. We have here, we found that 82% use the common technologies, 15% use non-typical technologies, and 4% of those papers create their own original technologies to study immersion or virtual reality. In common technologies, we found here that the most common technology were those related with skin conductance. After this, we found some EEG. Brief frequency is one of the most used technology too. The less common technology here were eye tracker, or some used for ocular exploration. And after this, we analyze the non-typical technologies. As we said before, those probably were used in health or medicine, but not common use in this kind of environments. So we found, for example, transcranial Doppler, body forces, ventilation, oxygen consumption, and some of them. And in original technologies, there are some new technologies. For example, the neuropathy that were developed to measure electrophysiological responses. However, there are some, for example, the virtual reality medical center, they doesn't create like a new technology. They just combine technologies already existent and create a new integrative system. So there are some of the original technologies. After this, we also classify the properties studied. From all the documents, we identified those who were using the variables included in nice tree. For example, we can see here that the real world disassociation is not studied at the moment. Of course, it doesn't use the technologies because it's not studied yet. However, for example, in perceptual immersion, the most common property study for those papers were the self-presence with 21 papers. And in this one is the only one that used the different type of technologies. So we can see here that they use the common technologies. The green one is the common technologies. The blue one is the original. They use OpenVivi. There is one original technology. And they also use the non-typical technology of oxygen consumption and ventilation. Is the only one that use the three kinds of technology that we found. After this, we found that emotional immersion is one of the most element studied, related also with immersive experience. For example, in attention, it's commonly find that the skin conductance, the heart rate, the eye activity, the respiration rate, brain activity, and muscle activity are related or are used to study the attention as well. Needs and engagement are also some of the most studied properties. In engagement, for example, they use salivary and less, and we can see here that all the related with emotional immersion use this one. This salivary amino acid is related with the cortisol, and the cortisol obviously is related with the stress. So it's logical to think that emotional immersion, of course, have to be related with the cortisol or the stress hormone. Well, we can see, for example, in social immersion, yes, we found that social interaction is common to use skin conductance or hair rate. However, in co-presence is not studied yet with some biometrical tools. In sensory engagement, for example, we found just one study, but this one study used 3 different technologies. Engagement used 3 different technologies, so we can't say that one technology is just for one property. It's not correct. As you see, some different biometrical tools help to identify or to study different one property as well. Here, and after this, we select these 26 studies because they were focused exclusively in immersion study and not in other types of or application. So we select just the papers that were focused or have in their variables of the study the immersive as a variable. We're trying to identify if they use the I-strip variables or what other properties they're used to identify or to study immersive environment in immersion. So we found that 58% use only the structure variables and its properties. However, we found that the I structure were mixed with another variables. Okay, so we have here 19%, and the rest, 33%, use only other variables. We try to identify which are those other variables, and we found that were anxiety and stress. However, as you can see, all of them use the structure variable. So it's important, and we are going to refer this in some conclusions. Okay. One of the most important conclusions that we can take from this study is that this study contributes to mapping of the links and the connection of the uses of biometrical devices, because we have seen the increasingly use of biometricals, but we don't know why or what are they studying with these biometrical tools. So it represents like a literature review to help to identify what are they studying and what properties have been used to measure with biometrical data. Also, we identified the categories used in this in virtual environment. As a second conclusion, we found that the I3 structures includes all the immersion study variables. Stress and anxiety were not included specifically in the I structure. However, they can be integrated in the emotional property that the I3 proposed. I think this reflects how strong the I3 is and how complete it is. So it can be used for another authors or in other investigation. They can use the I3 as a reflect or as a base to study immersion, because it also includes all the variables that had been studied from 2020. Another conclusion is that the availability of biometrical tools coincide with the most studied properties, or in other words, those that have been studied at least are the ones that have less biometrical tools available. I think this represents a great opportunity not only to study the variables proposed in the I3, but also to develop, to generate more research, or to propose physiological tools that will allow them to be studied. Because it can help that those variables that we see before that are not studied yet, maybe it's because they don't have enough tools to measure with physiological measure or physiological evaluation. So this is all the presentation. Thanks for your attention and for listening. I don't know if you have some question.
Thank you very much, Mariela. We can applaud you.
Thank you.
Okay, if you have some question, you can write it in the public chat. Okay, I have a question. In your paper, in the figure 3, we can see the type of measurement for the different variables, and I was surprised to see that there is no physiological measure identified for psychological flow.
You refer to
Yes, here. Flow, where it is.
Yeah, we didn't identify some biometrical tools used in this property. Probably because we, as we said before, probably there are not enough biometrical tools related with this property, or it doesn't exist yet. So it represents a great opportunity to find a new way to evaluate them.
Yeah, okay. There is another question in the chat. What are, in your opinion, the 2 or 3 physiological assessment systems that are essential for a good evaluation of the user experience?
Okay,
If you had to choose only 2 or 3 physiological assessment systems to measure user experience.
Yeah, probably well, the most commonly assessment or biometrical tools were skin conductance. So I can say we can use them. I can recommend to study biometrical. However, it will depend what are you trying to study, because as you see, this skin conductance is very helpful. But it gives you a lot of information. So I think it depends on what property you need you want to study, because as you can see in this image, you have most of them complement with another biometrical tools. So it depends on what are you trying to study. For example, in social interaction, you can use it as well in sensory engagement, for example. So it depends what are you trying to study to complement the skin conductance with another tools to really identify what you want to study.
Okay, thank you very much. Another question? Okay, no question. So
okay.
Thank you. Thank you. We can applaud you again.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Now we're gonna close this session.